Here we are in Genesis. We're in the 11th chapter, which is great and a little bit sad because we're only going to do this chapter and the very beginning of chapter 12, and that's going to wrap up our study of the beginning of all things, creation and how God made people in his own image, and then the beginning of the story of God's dealings with humankind. And I laid out weeks ago that I feel like if we understand the first 11 chapters of Genesis, we get how Genesis is going to go, and really we ought to have a pretty good understanding of what's going to happen from Genesis to Revelation, or as one of my friends in seminary used to say, from Genesis to maps. But not every Bible has maps in the back, but you see what I mean, from all the way to the very end. And I'll try to make that case today. I'm going to try to make that case pretty fast today. And when I get to this genealogy in chapter 12, no, the end of chapter 11, before chapter 12, I'm not going to say much about that, except that I'll say now, this is the promised line. This is the chosen line, the line that comes from Shem. And it ought to remind you of, we go Adam and Eve, and then we have Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel, and then we have Seth, and then we have this long line of Adam. Adam was thus many years old, and he had a son, and then he lived this many more years, had other sons and daughters, and then that son was this old when he had a son, and he lived this many more years and had sons and daughters. We're going to do that again, all these many chapters later, and it's supposed to ring in our hearts and strike chords and remind us, okay, once again, God is at work, and this is the line through whom his blessing is going to come. God always keeps his promises, and we see the beginnings of the major promise being kept at the very end of what I'm going to read. So, chapter 11, verse 1, and I'll read the first 3 verses of chapter 12. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, "If as one people, speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. This is the account of Shem. 2 years after the flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. And after he became the father of Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And after he became the father of Shelah, Arphaxad lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And after he became the father of Eber, Shelah lived 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. And after he became the father of Peleg, Eber lived 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he became the father of Reu. And after he became the father of Reu, Peleg lived 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he became the father of Serug. And after he became the father of Serug, Reu lived 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he became the father of Nahor. And after he became the father of Nahor, Serug lived 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And after he became the father of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the account of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren. She had no children. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years, and he died in Haran. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. When we were in North Carolina last month, we went to Hillsborough. It's an old colonial town, and there's a big memorial there that's on the path of an old Indian trading trail, Indian trading path that ran through there. But the memorial also mentions Daniel Boone, who made his way through there at various times, following the Indian trading routes along the way. Daniel Boone, one of the fascinating frontiersmen, but also early legislator, and somebody involved in both government, as well as wandering about in what was mostly wilderness. And one of his favorite sayings has changed over time since he said it. Come down in a few versions. The one I like best is this: I have never been lost, but I've been mighty confused for a few days. Never lost, but mighty confused for a few days. Now, there are various versions. Some are, I was bewildered once or twice, or I've never been lost, but I was confused for several weeks, but that didn't sound quite cool enough, so that's not usually very popular. Never lost, just confused. That came to mind as I was reading this about God saying, let us confuse their languages. And I thought, well, Daniel Boone was once confused, but really he was lost, but he made his way out. And then I realized, for the people here at Babel, they become confused in their language, confused in their purpose, and scattered over the face of the earth. But the real problem for all humankind at this point in the story, and it is not the first time they've come to the brink of it all falling apart. The real problem is not that they were confused. The problem is that they are lost, and they are really lost, and they are in need of salvation. And that is how these first 11 chapters more or less finish up until you get to the line of Shem, which leads to Abram, the one through whom God's promise will come. The line of Abram, God's covenant with Abram. Salvation is going to come because of God's relationship with Abram. But the people here are in big trouble, and they're not just confused. They're lost, and they need a Savior. The whole world had one language, a common speech. This is something that I'm really fascinated in, and I've got several books about this. One called not the Tower of Babel, but the Power of Babel, which kind of turns our image on its ear a little bit, and not necessarily true. But as I was reading this week and flipping through some of these things, there are a lot of things that interest me. One, I said there are about 6,000 human languages right now. Did come from one language, as the Bible reports. Probably, if we take both the Bible, but also people who study these things, may have moved actually to a different point in history. About 150,000 years ago, at the very latest, we're all speaking the same language. And then, as we go out, for various reasons, and there are lots of theories, we start speaking different languages. And again, I don't know if you've been in that situation where suddenly the world just seemed not quite right. I mean, you can tell by looking at my best friend, he's Vietnamese. So I knew he'd grown up speaking Vietnamese. I don't know why suddenly, when he speaks the language that he heard from the womb until, all the way through his adulthood, it was so jarring. And part of it is because his English is really great now. It wasn't great when I met him. His French is absolutely perfect. But it was as if I did not know the man. I didn't know what to make of this strange language coming out of his mouth. That's more than confusion. That is an isolation that I felt really deeply. It was a shocking moment for me. For the people also. Suddenly, going from understanding everybody, at least the words that they say, we who all speak the same language certainly can have misunderstandings, deep and powerful misunderstandings that can lead to divisions and separation and confusion, and that's just with one language. Well, they were all speaking one language, but still there were times that they were isolated from one another and had tiffs and fights and things like that. But think of that moment when suddenly they went from at least getting the words, if not always the meaning, to having no idea what each person is saying. Again, my interest in this is also that there are languages that are dying out, and I'm concerned about that, for lots of reasons. We'll talk about it another time, perhaps. And also, this is a freebie, and this is on thin ice, I know this, but having thought a lot about languages, just one of those things about the idea that we need to make sure that people in our country or people in other countries speak the language of the country. We need to be less concerned about that. Here's why. First generation, almost nobody speaks the language when they come here. So we'll say first generation immigrants to America, almost nobody speaks the language, right? Second generation usually can do both worlds, speak both the native language as well as the nation of the country to which people have immigrated. By the third generation, most of those people don't know their foreign tongue, their native language of their ancestors anymore. So anyway, that's your freebie. Just think about that. I don't think we need to worry too much about making sure people speak English. If they're here long enough, they will. The problem is, will they remember the language they used to have? Because we can say things in different ways and we can understand each other better through this. There's a blessing in this profusion of languages that we might miss. And that's what linguists just get so excited about. All these languages. And yet, we can make treaties, and we can give help to one another, and we can join together in battle or in work together. And it is an amazing thing that God is still at work, even though the languages are confused. Okay. If we'd been following the story carefully, we would already know there's trouble brewing in the very first 2 or 3 verses here. But because we know the story too well, we don't realize the trouble. Here's the trouble. Everybody speaks the same language. No surprise. They all came out of the ark together. It hadn't been that long. Of course, they're still speaking the same language. And they have a common speech, and they're moving eastward. That's fine, too. It's not just an eastward out of Eden, right? Because now we've had the flood, and the ark was floating around and ended up in Turkey. So they're just spreading out. Fine. They found a plain in Shinar, and they settled there. And we should immediately say, wait a minute. I'm not sure that's exactly what they're supposed to do. What is God's command, which is also a blessing? When they leave the ark, go out into all the world, be fruitful, increase and multiply, scatter over all the earth, and it's scattering with a blessing. Go and subdue this earth, and then care for this earth, be stewards of the earth, but go everywhere, spread out. The earth is yours. Here it is for you. Go and spread out. Scatter over the face of the earth, go everywhere. But the people don't want to do that. They want to make a place to where they can all stay. They found a plain there. It's nice here. Let's settle here. We know that we're supposed to go out over all the earth, but this is a nice place, so how about we all stay here? That's the first problem. That doesn't seem huge. It gets worse. Well, let's make bricks, and let's bake them thoroughly. Most people use stone to build in this time, but bricks are good too. And they use brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city. Not a huge problem. Cities are okay. But let us build ourselves a city for everyone here. We don't want to go any farther. We want to stay here. Let us build ourselves a city, and you should be getting a little uncomfortable. But then when they say with a tower that reaches to the heavens, you ought to be more than uncomfortable. This is the point at which you ought to be backing away from the story. Was it just yesterday? No. See, I have to be careful how much I say here. There was a certain meeting at church sometime in the last weeks, and the conversation took a turn, and so certain people were reminded, this isn't exactly a church we're at the Mendenhall Center, but it's next door to the church, and so just so you know, we don't want to be struck by lightning here next door to the church as these stories are unfolding. When they say with a tower that reaches to the heavens, that's where you really want to just shut the book and say, I do not want to know what's coming. This is the time to leave the room if the movie's playing. You do not want to see what's coming. Why? It's confusing for us. We like people who build big things. We're impressed with great big skyscrapers, and it is a gift of God that we have talents and skills and abilities. You've got architects and engineers and construction workers who can make amazing things, and that is part of God's creativity coming through us. The problem is not they want to build something big. The problem is what they want to build and why they want to build it. Let's build a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens. It's a very specific wording. And by that, they don't just mean that reaches up to the sky. They really mean heavens. Now, you've probably seen in cartoons or comic strips, we even had a wonderful book that we bought for Sophie when she was very young, that the pages folded out really big, and it was really a complicated book for a young person because it was easy to wreck this book. But the idea is of building a ladder that reached from the earth all the way to the moon. Daddy, get the moon for me, and you have to build a ladder. And so you can see the ladder teetering up through the clouds and reaching, and you can suspend your disbelief. You go, that's a really neat image. But if you thought very long and hard about how much it takes to get somebody from here to the moon and how many hundreds of thousands of miles it is, you realize there's a problem just getting to the moon. See, it's not that they want to build a really high tower and everyone can see it from all around. That's part of the problem. It's not really the problem. They really do want a tower that reaches to the heavens. And in this part of the world, you can't just build a tower, that's, say, 60 feet by 60 feet and then as high as you can make it. If you're going to make something high, you have to build it in the shape of a pyramid. And in this part of the world, there were stepped pyramids called ziggurats. And even the Mayans made similar things, not nearly so big, a stepped pyramid, where you can climb steps all the way up to the top. But these ziggurats were mostly pyramids, flat on the top, and had a big stairway. You could go from the bottom all the way up. Big stairway that's going to be important towards the end. And so you climb the stairs up, and then what do you stick on the top of your great big ziggurat, your great big pyramid? You stick a temple or a shrine there to offer sacrifices to a God who is not the one true God. And in fact, ziggurat even means, in one translation, a platform between heaven and earth. A platform, but it's a platform for worship, and it's a platform for worshiping the God who is not the God, creator of the universe, Lord of heaven and earth, the Lord who came down. They want to build not just a place of worship, but they want to build a stairway that actually does reach to heaven on purpose. Because this is the plan. This is the first step in the invasion. This is the idea. This is a direct attack upon God and heaven. They want a tower that reaches to the heavens because they want to climb up those stairs and make it to heaven and take over. That's the idea of the people. Let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Don't worry about the scattering now. Let's worry about the making a name for ourselves. I had about 4 passages I was very tempted to have Paula read today. I picked this one in Isaiah. There were 2 in Isaiah I could have picked. One was not comforting, judgment. And this one had a lot of good comforting images in it. So I thought, we'll try that. And I'll sneak it in, see if you notice the last phrase, talking about God who delivered his people, led his cattle down to the plains, given rest. This is how you guided your people to make for yourself a glorious name. Here's the big problem with the people in Babel. It's not just that they're not spreading over the earth like they're supposed to. And it's not just that they want to build a city. And even though it's very problematic they want a tower that reaches to the heavens, the root of their problem and the great danger to them and to all humanity at this point, once again, we work our way through the cycle. God blesses, God delivers. The people are so thankful for a few minutes, and then they forget, and then they want to do things their way. Let's make a name for ourselves. The threat here, which threatens all humankind then and now, is pride. The sin that they're committing is exactly the same as that of Adam and Eve in the garden. God says to Adam and Eve, here's a garden. It's lovely here. All these trees bear fruit, and you're going to like all of them, and they're different, and they're wonderful. Eat from any of these trees. Anything you want, go and eat it. Anywhere in this garden, go and eat it. It is all for you. Everything you see, except for that one tree. Don't eat from that tree. Everything else is yours. Just don't eat from that tree. And the serpent says, did God really say you couldn't eat from that tree? Did God really say that you'd die if you ate from that tree? God doesn't mean that. He just doesn't want you to be like him. He just doesn't want you to be like God. One of the tricky things that Satan does is that the lies that Satan tells are often very close to the truth, but not quite. In this case, the serpent is able to convince Adam and Eve not to trust God, that God's a little jealous of them. God wants to keep them down. God doesn't want to give them every good thing when God has said every good thing. It's all yours. Take it. Enjoy it. Delight in it. But the real problem here is this. God does want Adam and Eve to be like him. It's not only the reason why there's a tree of the knowledge of fruit of good and evil in the garden, there's also a tree of life in the garden. And God's whole plan is that Adam and Eve and their descendants and you and me and all who belong to God and all who are saved by God would exactly do that. We would be like God. We would be glorified. Christ is raised in a resurrection body, and it's a body he still has right now, but it's a glorified resurrection body. And the whole plan, the whole story, to skip right to the punchline, the whole reason for this book and this story and what God is doing is so that people who naturally turn away, reject, abandon God might miraculously, wonderfully be brought into God's presence, brought into the presence of a holy, glorious, majestic God, and not die, but actually come in as the children of God, the daughters and sons of the Most High God. God absolutely intends you to be like him in glory. Not entirely. God is God. But we are going to be an awful lot like the only begotten Son of God in our resurrected, glorified forms. And he wants us to be with him, and he wants us to be like him. That's the whole deal. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, this is how God wants you to live so that you can understand who God is and what God is like, and then you can live in a way that pleases God. God wants you to look at the world like God looks at the world, to love people like God loves people. It's exactly what God wants. What do they want? They don't want God to make a name for himself. They want to make a name for themselves. Okay? God is the only one worthy of a name, reputation, renown, because God is the one true God. And the only one who can pursue his own glory and pursue having a name, making a name and a glorious name for himself in a way that is not prideful, is not arrogant, is not sinful. And we who want to make a name for ourselves, a reputation, renown, glory for ourselves, always want to do that to the exclusion of God rather than as children of God. That's the problem they found themselves in. And it's a problem that is dangerous for us today. We are not so much prone to making little idols and worshiping them, but we are very much prone to idolatry today, putting something else in the place of God. Lots of things try to fit that niche. None will fit, but we will try. It's not just these people here in this plain in Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq, by the way, just so you can keep it in your heads. The problem is that all of humanity is once again threatened because their pride and their arrogance have led them to plan an invasion of heaven. If we build this tower, we're going to walk right up those stairs, we're going to walk right into heaven, and we're taking over. We want to be in charge, and we're going to be gods. And let's see if he can stop us, which is a bad idea, by the way. Never say, let's see if God can stop us. Here's the pitiful and sad thing. I'll get to the pitiful, sad thing in a second. When we hear God's response, God says, as one people speak in the same language, they've begun to do this, then nothing will be impossible for them. We better go fix this. We better go stop this problem. It is almost impossible for us to hear that and understand that God is doing something good and healthy and saving here. What it sounds like is exactly what the serpent whispers once again. Yeah, see, I told you. God doesn't want you to be like him. They're going to plan a route that's going to take them right into heaven. And God says, we better stop them because if they're working together, they'll figure it out. Really? Really? If they make enough bricks, they're going to make a stairway that's going to go all the way to heaven. So God says, wait a minute. We got to stop this now. Stop it in its tracks, nip it in the bud because they might actually do it. That's not the problem at all. Here's the sad, pathetic thing. These human beings, so sure that they are in charge, so sure that they have this power and these skills and abilities and the intelligence to do this, are working on this tower. It's going to go all the way to heaven. It's going to be great. How big do we need to make it at the base in order to make it all the way to heaven? And they're working and building this tower. And then the Lord came down. It's going to be the biggest pyramid ever seen, the biggest ziggurat ever, and it's going to reach all the way to heaven. Have you ever been on an airplane and you know that you're probably near somewhere that you know and you're looking out the window trying to decide, is that what I know? Is that what I know? When I went home for my dad's birthday a year ago, when I flew out of Dallas, I'm coming over southwest Arkansas and I'm looking at these lakes and I'm trying to figure out, okay, I know we're probably going to go over Lake DeGray and then there's going to be Ouachita and Hamilton, but I don't recognize that lake, and later on it turns out that I'd never even heard of the lake I went over, and I'd lived in Arkansas for a lot of years. One cool time, Wendy and I were flying at night, and we were flying to Dallas, and then going to have to jump back and fly to Little Rock, and then drive an hour back to Hot Springs. It's a real pain to do this. And it also can be heartbreaking, because the way they fly planes is that you pretty much go near airports. So we're flying for Boston. And here we come, and we go over Little Rock, and we look, that's definitely Little Rock, and there's the airport that we'll be at in 4 hours. Okay, so we go over. That's heartbreaking, nothing compared to the fact that I look out and I say to Wendy, wait, that's Hot Springs. That's Hot Springs right there, and there's Central Avenue, and there are the mountains, and so right about there is where my parents are, because they haven't left their house yet, because they don't need to, because we're going to go to Dallas, and then we're going to wait, and then we're going to get on a plane and fly to Little Rock, and it's only an hour, so they're still at home, and if we could jump out right now, we could be home. Instead, we'll be there in 3 hours. That doesn't even come close to what's going on here. We are going to build a temple so big that it's going to reach right to the gates of heaven, and we're going to stroll in. God says, and this is only from our point of view so we can understand God. God can see all things. God knows all things. God can be everywhere. But the image given to us, which ought to make you laugh as well as want to cry, is God says, we'd better go down there and check this out. we're going to build a stairway that goes right to heaven. God's like, we're going to have to go all the way down there because first we're going to look for the city. God came down to see the city because it is so far from heaven that most of the angelic beings can't really see there's the city. And then we're going to go find this tiny little tower they've been working on. They are so sure that they can storm the gates of heaven if they just keep working. And God has to come down. Lord in his heaven comes down to check things out. Okay, enough of that. They were never even close to being able to do it. So when God says, if one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. He does not mean, given enough time and enough bricks, they're going to make it all the way up here. What he means is they have already completely rejected God and God's purposes in their lives, and they are so sure that they can make themselves God that if we don't go do something now, they're going to keep going on this path. And they're going to try to make themselves God instead of the one true God. And they are all going to die. God comes down to save them. He comes down and confuses their language so that he scatters them no longer with his blessing. The first was a command. Go out and fill the earth, increase, multiply, all that with my blessing. Now it is, I've got to scatter them so that I can gather them again. If here, united, they are so prone to pride and arrogance and idolatry and egocentrism, making themselves the center of their whole existence, then we got to scatter them in order to put them in a place where I can bring them back as my own people, as people who can be saved. The Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel. Actually, in the Akkadian language, they were probably speaking something like, that means the gate to God, the gateway to God. You weren't even close. You're so far removed, you were never going to make it. But Babel we know as a confusion or a confusion of language. Okay. The people, once again, have received God's blessing, are spreading out with the blessing of God. They're making their way over the earth, and then they decide, not God's way, we're going to do it my way. Not the way that leads to life, but we're definitely going to go this other road that we hear leads to death, but we're not going to believe that. And they are in need of salvation. The reason we get this genealogy over again is to alert you, this is the line of promise, and from this line of promise is going to come Abram, who is going to hear from God, and God's going to make promises, a covenant, a relationship with Abram, and through Abram, all nations will be blessed. How? When? How does that happen? One of the reasons that one of my projects is that we really begin to learn our Bibles, even weird stories in Genesis or other prophets or other things, is because if we really knew our Bibles cold, then I could do in a few seconds what would take me really 15 minutes to do properly. I'm going to give it to you in a few seconds anyway. We go from the story of the people trying to build their way to heaven so they can storm the gates of heaven. They will never succeed. And God says, I have got to scatter them so I can gather them. A few chapters later, Jacob, not Abram, not his son Isaac, but his son Jacob, is going to be traveling. And there he lies down in the middle of his journey, puts a stone under his head for a pillow, and he has a dream when he sleeps. And in that dream, heaven opens, and there is a stairway that goes to heaven. And angels are ascending and descending the stairway. So this idea of a temple, a stairway that leads up to heaven, these people had completely twisted for their own purposes. And God said, okay, you like that idea? Let me show you what it's really like. Makes a stairway to heaven, and angels go up and they come down. And then you have to skip ahead a long way. But about 14 months ago when we started the Gospel of John, Jesus is calling his first disciples, among them Philip and Nathanael. And Nathanael cannot believe some of the things that Jesus is saying. Jesus says, you think that's great? Let me tell you something else. You're going to see greater things than that. You're going to see heaven open and angels ascending and descending, not a stairway, not a ziggurat, not a temple for pagan gods, ascending and descending the Son of Man himself. Stairway or a ladder. The only way that we can look much like a ladder, I think, is when we stand up straight with our arms outstretched. And Jesus on the cross is the way by which people who thought they could storm the gates of heaven are instead invited to go where they could not go. The Lord came down to the city, scattered them in order to gather them. The Lord came down in Jesus Christ to be not only the way and the truth and the life, but to be the one through whom we can come into the presence of God, a holy God, and there not die, but live forever. Will you please join me in prayer? Lord, by your grace, help us so to live and so to love that we show ourselves to be sons and daughters of the Most High God, showing your love in this world, shining your light, living out good news. We who have been shown the way to come into your presence, the way